Hi, I'm Olivia. Throughout this video, I will be explaining what factors brought settlers to Maryland and talking about daily life in Maryland in the 16 to 1700s. You will learn what different reasons people were moved into Maryland and who chose to and or who was forced there. So let's get started. There were 13 colonies as shown in this picture. We have New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and last but not least, Virginia. The 13 colonies had three main sections: New England, the Middle Colonies, and the Southern Colonies. The New England colonies were Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. The Middle Colonies included New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. And the Southern Colonies consisted of Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. There were three main reasons people migrated to Maryland and the 13 colonies in general. Those are economic opportunity, religious freedom, and forced migration. Forced migration was when people involuntarily went to Maryland. They were forced to by people who had more power than they did. Economic opportunity is the chance to do work someone will pay you for. Religious freedom is the right to practice the religion you wanted, although George Calvert wanted a haven for specifically British Catholics. And here are some pictures of a haven and people practicing their religion. The amount of involuntary migration was much higher than the people who actually wanted to go. 74% of people didn't want to be there, while only 26% did want to migrate to Maryland. The people who did had to be strict or mean to keep the people who didn't want to be there in line, and most people were unhappy to be there because they had no choice, so you wouldn't have seen many smiling faces. There were three different types of people who were forced to Maryland. The first group was Africans, the second was indentured servants, and the last group of people were convicts who involuntarily got moved to Maryland to harvest tobacco. A convict is someone who's found guilty of crime in a court of law. There was a lot of slavery going on. This is a primary document from a slave auction on July 24th of 1769, announcing the cargo entering to the slave owners. Between 1770 and 1775, approximately 585,000 people immigrated to the 13 colonies. 52,200 were convicts, or 9%. There were 278,400 slaves, which would be 47%. And there were 103,600 indentured servants, or 18%. And 151,600 free immigrants, which is 26%, who are the 26% that wanted to be there. Here is a visual representation of 500,000 people. This is a primary document from 1632 called the Charter of Maryland, shown in the original and modern translation. A charter is a formal written statement that gives permission to form a colony and explains rights and responsibilities. The purpose of this document was to establish Calvert as the leader of Maryland based on his role in Ireland and England. He intends to convert Indians into Christianity. This picture is kind of hard to see, but it's a secondary document from 1634. It was meant for Christians and everyone in Maryland. It shows the role of Christianity in founding of Maryland. It's both a persuasive and an informational document. The largest group of people to immigrate between 1607 and 1699 were indentured servants, but between 1700 and 1775, the largest group to immigrate were slaves. The reason this change happened was because after a certain number of years, you would have to owe indentured servants several things, like a house and other stuff. Whereas a slave, you completely own them and you can force them to reproduce, and then you have more slaves and you don't end up owing them anything. The first colonists arrived in Maryland in 1634 on two ships, one called the Ark and one called the Dove. Catholics soon realized this was an opportunity to introduce their religion to the native population. Converting Native Americans to a new religion was encouraged but was not their main goal. This here is a document from 1633 to 1684, meant for servant signers and later historians. Its purpose was to legally bind a person to another person for a set amount of time, which, like I said previously, would make that person a servant. George Calvert was born in 1580 in Kipling, New Yorkshire, England. He died April 15th of 1632 at age 52 or 53. His spouse was Anne Main, and he had 13 children. His mom died when he was 8, and his father then married George's mother's first cousin, Grace Crossland. Weird, I know. Here's a picture of him. Mercantilism. Mercantilism was an economic cycle of which the colonies provided British industry with raw materials they needed. The materials were turned into goods and sold in Britain and England and exported to the colonies. So, like I said before, a lot of people were forced to Maryland to harvest tobacco. That brings us back to indentured servants. After they picked tobacco or did what you wanted for a certain amount of time, for instance, 10 years, then you would owe them maybe somewhere to live or food or something else. So, how they got paid is very different than how you get paid nowadays, obviously. So, instead of getting paid in money for doing work, they would get paid in a house or whatever that other sorts of stuff is. Life in Maryland today is much different. In 2017, there's a recorded 6.052 million people living in Maryland. It's well known by its largest city, Baltimore. More about Baltimore. It was founded on July 30th of 1729. There's approximately 614,600 people in Baltimore. It's a city of over 220 neighborhoods. You might have heard of Michael Phelps, an Olympian holding 22 medals. He was born in Baltimore. Here's the Baltimore flag. A popular sports team for Baltimore is the Ravens for football. A few nicknames for the city are Charm City and Be More. Their mottos are the greatest city in America, get on it, and believe. And last, some fun facts about Maryland. It's the 19th most populated state in the U.S. It has 18 national parks and 72 state parks. 43% of Maryland is covered by forests. And the most important fact, the crab cakes from Maryland are top notch. So that was my presentation on Maryland and early American settlement.